What's up, YouTube? Welcome back to the Cutlass Board Games channel. My name's Keith and I make games for a living, and that's why I like to pay close attention to what Magic the Gathering is doing. Usually it's the place that a lot of designers start when it comes to learning more complex design theory. Now, I've made a couple of videos recently talking about the designs around commander cards. Why aren't there any good Teamer commanders, or why aren't there any good Esper commanders? And I want to spend this video talking about some of the theory of why I believe these certain lists of requirements that I laid out in the previous videos make for a good commander experience. A lot of people kind of misunderstood the goal of the previous videos, and they're like, but my favorite guy doesn't meet those requirements, but it's still a fun time. That's why I'm going to explain to you why you're wrong. And then also I've designed 10 different commander cards, one for each of the 3 color options, to show off, look, if I'm such a critic, surely I can make good commanders that meet these requirements and are mechanically unique and interesting, so that you can then in the comments critique me and tell me why I'm shit at my job. And then we'll see where we go from there. So let's talk about the list of requirements. And I'll explain why we have each one. First of all, is costs 3 or 4. Now, the main thing is this is Commander. This format is defined by the fact that you select your favorite guy, and the whole deck is designed to facilitate that favorite guy. If your favorite guy costs 10 mana, he's going to be absent for most of the game. And this is the critique I have with the Eminence style of commander. Like, look, we love Oloro, but what does Oloro do? He just gains you life. How often are you really going to be casting him? Same goes for Sign of the Dragon. Same goes for, Edgar Markov. Great, and I've loved playing Inala. Inala is a really interesting commander, but they are not the star of the show. You did not build your deck around this creature that is going to be played and get into, dealing commander damage is going to be the focus around everything that you do. You built your deck around an emblem, and that's not commander. I think that's much less interesting, and so I don't think that they are good. Next point is 3 colors. Look, call me classic, but the original Elder Dragon Highlander meant that you had to play an Elder Dragon, and they were 3 colors, and they were expensive, and their abilities weren't very good. Look, things have changed since then, but I still think 3 colors is the way to play the format, because every single time I'm building a deck, I go, damn, I wish I had this one card. Damn, this archetype that I'm playing has so many cards in an off color that I just wish that I could play them. Or, my core strategy really needs this thing that this color does well, and I'm missing out on that because I'm playing too few colors. And I also think there's so much more variety in how your land base has to operate, because you have to facilitate playing multiple colors instead of just playing basics, and then you're trading off successfully having access to all the mana to cast everything versus utility lands and things like that. And when we're seeing more and more cards like Urborg and Yavimaya, where everything becomes a land type or one type, and like mana fixing actually is pretty easy, it's a lot harder to have that trade-off of, damn, I don't have access to these cool fun cards that are in half of my colors or just in an off color that I need, when you could just be playing 3 colors. The main argument I feel like against playing 3 colors all the time is because there isn't enough commanders in those colors, because you can't print them into standard in the same way that you can into commander precon content, because a lot of the precon content does have multicolored stuff, whereas a lot of legendary creatures we see in standard are monocolored, especially in the Spider-Man set. So it's really hard to have enough of them designed to meet the demand that I have, but that's what we're going to be doing today. We're going to be building some. Anyway, has an impact on cast. A lot of people misunderstood the point of this. Has an impact on cast is when I play my guy, I want it to do something. And there is a lot of good commanders that do this, and it might not necessarily be right away, but sometimes they give a like a good end step trigger. Sometimes it's when they attack on that turn, but they do have haste, or in Tidus's example, he doesn't have to attack, but at the beginning of combat you have a trigger to move a counter somewhere, and then when your other creatures do combat damage, he activates. That's what I want to see. I want the turn that I play my commander, them to have a presence. I want my guy to do a thing when I cast it. And so that's why Miram gets a no from me. Miram sucks because it costs 6. It doesn't have an impact on play. You are begging the other players to allow you to untap so that you can cast twice as many dragons? Why? That seems ridiculous to me. I would rather it just made a copy of a dragon that was in play already when I cast it, and it facilitates the same thing. But it has an impact on cast in that way. The other thing is that if you are behind, you weren't the guy that got Soul Ring, you're player 4, everyone else is in front of you playing your commander and it does nothing, and then it has a propensity to get removed, or you just catch a stray in that there's a big sweeper because they have to deal with somebody else. That sucks big time. You played your big guy, the star of the show, the big boss, and he didn't do anything. What was the point? And so you get into these scenarios where there's other players that are further in front of you, and you go, well, I'm not going to play the big dog because why would I? I have to deal with removing stuff. And that sucks big time because they're the star of the show. That's the damn card you're supposed to be building and playing the whole deck around. So they need to do something. You need to be incentivized to be playing this card. And for the same reason, has a lasting effect while in play. Not just on the turn that you play them, but they need to give you access to something that interacts with the rest of your game plan, builds strategy. A lot of commanders have the word whenever printed on them because it says, do this thing as often as possible, and that's what you want. And that leads into, helps communicate a game plan for deck building. A lot of the good commanders, like I will say Pantlaza is a great commander, but it says you must play a kindred strategy. So you go, okay, do I want to play dinosaurs? I can play Pantlaza. Do I want to play a Pantlaza effect but not play dinosaurs? Well, I can't. And so that's kind of one of the problems I have with some of these things. And that was my greatest critique with Temur, because we have Omnath, who arguably meets all these requirements, except the game plan that it communicates is play elementals, and I don't think that's good enough. And so you want to have it communicate a game plan which is more like a particular strategy or an axis of attack. For example, Sellers, which was like one of the perfect examples that I gave in that previous video, says whenever a creature enters the battlefield from your graveyard, put a +1/+1 counter on all of your creatures. So you want to do that all of the time. Or it says, I go infinite with any persist creature. So you go, okay, well, I will find a persist creature. That's the thing that I'm going to be doing. That communicates the game plan. So this is what I think makes a good commander. You are welcome to argue with me in the comments, and I respond to every single comment, and I will tell you why you are wrong. This is what I think creates the least bad moments. Actually, like, the reason why Commander is a different and fun format from every other format, it's the only format where you pick your favorite guy and they're part of the show. So if your favorite guy doesn't get to be part of the show, what's the point on picking that guy? So we want more stuff that meets these requirements so that your special guy can do more things, can be the star of the show. That is the point. Now let's get started talking about some of these custom cards that I have created, because I think there's some cool stuff for us to uncover in here. Let's start with Eshki. Look, I made Eshki previously in the Why They're No Good Temur Commanders video as a good place to start, and I'm doing it again. All these commanders, I picked an existing character and reused their art for this for 2 reasons. 1, it's like way easier. 2, I refuse to AI generate like literally anything. And 3, here's a free reason. It lists the artist credit at the bottom, and I don't have to figure out who drew it if I'm using random art I ripped off Google. So I appreciate that. And so here is Eshki, Beacon of Trinities. Spoiler alert, every single one of the commanders I designed cost 4, and then they're 3-color combo, so I will not read out the mana cost. This one is in Temur colors. It is a 3/3 human warrior, and the text reads, the first spell you cast from exile with mana value 3 or less each turn costs 0. When Eshki enters or attacks, exile the top 3 cards of your library. You may cast them for as long as they stay exiled. So this is a value generating engine. Eshki enters. She has an enters trigger where you exile the top 3 cards of your library, and then you may play them. Well, you can't play them with your lands. You may cast them for as long as they stay exiled. So if Eshki gets deleted immediately, you've still got access to these 3 cards that you can cast at any time, which is some of the limitations that I see for other things. Like Spider Gwen is like, look, you get 1 card, but then if I die, it's gone forever. You're like, okay. And then you just can't play expensive cards in your deck because they just vanish forever, like really often, and that kind of blows hard. Whereas instead, the top line of text is communicating what we want to be doing with our game plan, and that is playing lots of value spells that cost 3 or less. That could be lots of creatures, that could be, you know, lots of removal, because it's each turn you could potentially load up a bunch of instants into the exile pile, and then you can be firing them off whenever they become relevant in your opponent's turns. I think that this gives you a lot of different angles for designing the deck. Either you want to be super aggressive, or you want to sit back and be more protective, or your goal is to like land 1 threat and Voltron them, because look, it could be enchantments. You could be stacking a bunch of those powerful green and blue enchantments on Eshki herself, and then also having protection spells sitting there in exile waiting to be cast. I don't think this is broken because it telegraphs everything that you can do for free to all the other players. So if you do have a counterspell sitting there, they know and can play around that option. And mana value 3 or less means that you're not getting anything crazy or insane happening, but it also gives you an interesting way to build around the curve of your deck, which I think is kind of cool. It very communicates what you're trying to do, and I think this is good. I think this meets all the requirements, right? Cost 3 or 4 is 3 colors, has an impact on cast. You get 3 extra cards that you can play. As a lasting effect, those cards are free and helps communicate a game plan. We have a few options, but it tells you kind of what the limit is. In the same way that like Luris says you shouldn't pay permanents above 2 for me to be your companion, you could look at deck building this in the same way. Let's move on to the next one. This is Felithar, Anthem of the Lost. Now, I made 3 commanders that use this specifically, create an emblem style, and I think it is a really interesting way to solve the has an impact on cast, because as a lasting effect even while they're not there because of that huge impact. But the effect itself isn't broken, but does stack nicely if you get additional emblems. Let's talk about it. When Felithar enters, create an emblem with if 2 or more creatures were put into your graveyard from anywhere this turn, creatures you control gain +1/+1. Whenever Felithar attacks, return a creature from your graveyard to the battlefield with power 1 or less. So this is kind of cool in a couple different ways. So the first thing is, it comes in, you make that emblem, and you could be making multiple emblems during a game if you have to recast Felithar a bunch of times. The way that the emblem is worded is if 2 or more creatures were put into your graveyard from anywhere, means that you could mill them if you're playing Overlord of the Baelmerk or Stitcher Supplier. Pretty easy access in these colors. There's also a bunch of Golgari type stuff that will put dudes in bin, and so you can turn on this Anthem effect. It also can just be if you sacrifice a bunch of guys. You could be playing something like Sephiroth. Sephiroth comes in, eats a guy, and then when you have your second guy eaten, then your anthems will turn on. And like I said, the first time Felithar comes in, it's just +1/+1 anthem with a hoop that you have to jump through. But as you get further and further into the game, all of a sudden it's like, well, actually, I'm getting +3/+3. Well, actually, I'm getting +4/+4. If I have lots of tokens, if I have lots of little guys, it becomes pretty good. And then on the attack trigger, you can return a creature that is power 1 or less. So you could be looking at Voice of Victory. You could be looking at any sack outlet like Carrion Feeder to potentially enable the combo. So I think this does very clearly communicate what the game plan is here, and it identifies targets for it. It says you want creatures with power 1 or less. It says you want the ability to move creatures into the graveyard for value. And I think this is just like a really cool design. You could literally remove the emblem part and just Felithar has that thing, but it just being +1/+1 isn't good enough. And as it scales into the late game, you're not going to want to play Felithar for 6. if it is kind of just getting, you're kind of hoping to go like, okay, Felifar 4, Felifar 6, and then reanimate it later to get the +3, get the +4 as it goes on, which is not that difficult in these colors. And then you're angling on, getting some bigger anthems that way. I don't think this is too broken. I know emblems are kind of crazy, but I think this is fine. I think this is really cool. I think it really does have the impact on cast. The lasting effect doesn't even require its attack trigger because it's an emblem, and it does really clearly communicate your deck building game plan. That's a win from me. Let's move on to the next one. This is Gonti. So there's 2 cards in this list that I think I went a little crazy with. This is one of them, but I think it's on the fun factor side. Okay, so look. If you're getting angry with me about this one in particular in the comment section, everything you say is correct, but I'll still fight you. Let's read the text box. It says, when Gonti enters or attacks, each player exiles a card from their hand face down. Choose one of these cards, and you may cast it without paying its mana cost. Any cards not chosen this way are returned to their owner's hands. If a land was chosen this way, repeat this process. So let me break it down for you. Gonti enters... each player picks a card from the hand and plays it face down. So it's kind of the way that when people activate Liliana the Veil and everyone has to discard, you're not giving information to other players about the thing that you discard, so you like to kind of play it face down until everyone's picked that thing, and then you put it in the graveyard. We're looking at the same kind of formula for this. Everyone exiles their card face down, and then the Gonti player goes, which of you picked something that has value to me, and then picks that card, knowing that the Gonti player also plays something. And then you then get to cast that thing for free, and then all of the other cards are returned. But if you pick a land, then you get to do it again. So obviously there is some kind of a crazy access to it, and look, there's some pretty easy fixes to this. Potentially, you could be making it a random choice. You picking a card from your own hand is probably a bit unfair, so maybe it should be each other player, which is, again, like a really easy fix. But the goal is you're creating this kind of bluff scenario where all of these cards are played, and you as the Gonti player are trying to figure out which of them is the best by reading the other players, trying to guess what cards they have in hand. Did they just shoot it for something powerful? How many cards they have in hand? Was this their last card? Are you going to hit a land and try again, and stuff like that? I think this is the beginning of a really interesting idea. It's probably on the more powerful side because it's a lot of text to try and figure out. And it's one of those things where in playtesting you go, okay, me adding a card is too much. If there's only 3 players, it's kind of not that good or whatever. But I really like that idea of okay, I am picking something to get value with, but I don't know what it is, and I'm trying to go from there. So I think this is a good start. Next, let's talk about Gorion, Searcher of the Scattered. This is probably one of my favorites of the bunch, but also I am always kind of biased to Bant because I think it has some of the best utility creatures, and I like playing dudes in land, so this one kind of goes nicely. The text box reads, when Gorion enters, you get an emblem with creatures you control gain survival. At the beginning of your second main phase, if this creature is tapped, reveal the top card of your library. If it is a creature card, you may put it into your hand. Whenever Gorion attacks, scry 2. So basically, survival is one of my favorite mechanics at the moment. I really like Rip Spawn Hunter, and I really like that there is a lot of mechanical effects in Bant that will allow you to, find guys, play guys, tap them for advantage, talking about Convoke, talking about Station with like Sarima and stuff like that. And so you are able to then build out something and go, okay, here's Gorion, I get my emblem, all my guys have survival, which includes Gorion. Is there people I can attack with? Is there something I can station Gorion with? Is there a way to tap all my guys? My favorite being Sky Hussar in the upkeep with that forecast trigger. And then at the beginning of the second main phase, it will put cards in your hand which are specifically creatures. So the thing that it's communicating to you is you want to play lots of creatures. You want to play lots of value creatures, of which there is a lot in these colors. Again, Rip Spawn Hunter, pretty good card that kind of works with exactly the strategy. And then on the subsequent turns, not only will Gorion be able to still be looking at creatures from your deck, potentially drawing them, but also when he attacks himself, you get to scry 2 to potentially put creatures on top or put non-creatures on the bottom, which I think is really cool. And kind of synergies nicely with itself. And I don't think it's so broken because you are only drawing creature cards. If you get stuck with no way to manipulate the top card of your deck and you reveal a not creature card, every subsequent survival trigger fails because it will just reveal the same thing and it will not get put into your hand. So even if you have a million creatures and it's a land on top, it's not going to draw you anything. So I don't think it's broken. I know, again, emblems are really powerful, and Gorion could just have the text where it just says creatures you control gain, and then the survival text, which would also be fine. But we're talking about having a lasting impact here, that getting multiple copies of this emblem in play means that if you have less creatures, they will potentially trigger and be able to dig and draw you more creatures. If you get more creatures, you might hit that critical mass. And we're trying to like look at a more approaching Tulane power level if you're able to stack your deck, or if you're able to do something like Mana Severance and remove all the lands from it, you are going to get more and more value out of this ability. And again, it's tapped in post-combat, so if you're drawing something like Crater Hoof Behemoth, everyone will see it, it will be revealed, you will not be able to do it until your next turn. Again, very clearly telegraphed to the table what you are doing, so its power level is kind of capped when it comes to interaction. Let's move on to the next one. This is possibly number 2 of the crazy ones, but I like her very much. This is Marika, Tournament Sweeper in Jund. Whenever a non-token creature dies, it becomes a treasure artifact token with tap, add 1 mana of any color, and loses all other abilities instead. So if you sacrifice your guy, you're about to go infinite with Sephiroth, you sacrifice your guy, it doesn't die, it becomes a treasure instead. So no dies triggers are going to really be happening there in that way. And well, sort of. When we look at the second line of text, we'll kind of discuss this, but it becomes a treasure instead. So it doesn't stop you from going infinite for your opponent, because they can potentially go, okay, my guy dies, and then it becomes a treasure, and then I sacrifice the treasure, and then the guy's still in the bin, so I can bring it back again or whatever. It doesn't fully shut down everything, but second line of text, when Marika enters, she fights target creature. Whenever a creature dealt damage by Marika dies this turn, gain control of all treasures that player controls. So there is going to be a dies trigger, and Marika will see it for both halves. It will be replaced, and then she will still trigger and then gain control of all those treasures, which includes the creature that just became a treasure. At least that's the idea. I know some of the perhaps mechanical functions of how this works might not work ideally, and it could be reworded to make that work, but that's, as close as I got. Thematically, I think this is like a fantastic gladiatorial character. She enters, she fights a guy, it dies, because she's a 4/3, I guess, that's really powerful or something, and then the thing that died becomes a treasure that she claims for herself. And she just sweeps the board that they have all their other treasures, because she is now the #1 gladiator, which I think is really cool. Having a gain control of other players' treasures feature is also very powerful in EDH, because I think a lot of people sit on treasures and just let them accumulate and don't really spend them. Like, a lot of the time they can just kind of sit there. It's also really good against the Smothering Tithe player, because I'm just going to continue to bully you. You play any creatures, I'm coming for you, and I'm taking all those treasures, which is kind of like a good tempo swing back for some of these more aggressive value generating cards. This was entirely more about creating cool gladiator flavor for the Jund archetype. I think it kind of works. It has a little bit of automatic interaction, in kind of stopping graveyard decks a little bit, or potentially helping them, because you can also just be a graveyard deck where you're like, okay, I want to turn all my guys dying into treasures anyway, and then having the fight is like a little bit of pseudo removal depending on how big the creature is, and then you're able to gain all of those treasures, which I think is kind of cool. The other thing that I think is funny is that if Marika fights something bigger than her and she dies, she becomes a treasure. And then you can crack the treasure, and then she goes to the bin, and then you have the opportunity to choose if she is returned to the command zone or not, which is kind of funny. So, I don't know. I think this is a really interesting, again, place to start. I really like the idea of interacting with treasures and then interacting with creatures dying to create treasures, and because this was this is all flavor, much less mechanical design. Anyway, let's move on to the next one. I think I've given you enough to complain about in the comments. This is Marisi Mountain Soul, the Naya Commander. When Marisi enters, put a creature card from your hand onto the battlefield tapped as a colorless mountain land. It stops being a creature. Not written on the card, but implied, it stops being a creature. Whenever Marisi attacks, target land you control becomes a 1/1 creature tapped and attacking. So basically, you want a cool creatures in Naya colors that have interesting effects when they get into the combat step, and then when they're being blocked, when they're dealing damage. It won't hit the attacks trigger in the same way that Kalia of the Vast doesn't hit the thing that she puts into play as attacks trigger, because it's being added in the attacker step, not being moved into the declare attacker step, if that makes sense. But this is like a really cool twist on, so Marisi enters, and then a creature card from your hand becomes a mountain. It stops having the creature type, but it still has the creature body text in it. It doesn't lose the other abilities. There's some cards on Arena that function like this. One in particular is a black creature that you can tap to cast a creature from your graveyard, and it becomes an artifact and stops being a creature. We are kind of looking at that same scenario here. There is an enchantment that just turns something into a forest and it stops being a creature. This is the same vibe. So that creature you play is going to become a mountain and not a creature. And then when you attack, Marisi can turn that creature, or just any land that you have, into a 1/1 creature tapped and attacking. So if you have something with cool keywords on it, like Death Touch, I know it's really unlikely in Naya colors, or stuff that when it deals damage it has triggers, then like a Ragavan. Here's my Ragavan mountain land. I'm going to attack. Here's my Ragavan, who is a 1/1 tapped and attacking. And it also helps you ramp, because you don't necessarily need to be attacking with Marisi to animate the guy. And then you can just be ramping out by turning your creatures into lands. So maybe you don't need to play a big land count. You can be playing lots of creatures instead. And I think that this is really interesting design. It kind of solves. Everyone's trying to fucking solve the land problem. It solves the land problem by once you've hit your third one, everything is a land, basically. And then it gives you meaningful interactions with the lands that you have played, which I think is kind of cool. It's completely mechanically unique. As a creature doing this, there is other stuff in the game that signals that this is a possibility, which I always think is a really interesting design space to play around with. This one gets a plus from me, because, like, once again, cost 3 or 4 is 3 colors, has an impact on cost, it makes a land. It has that same thing Visa does, where it's like, well, if I play it now, I got a land tapped. If you kill straight away on my subsequent turn, all I have to do is play a land from my hand, and then I can cast it again immediately, which will give me another land tapped. The difference is that Visa conjures it out of thin air. Marisi, you actually need to have the cards in your hand, so it's not like infinite value, but it's pretty good keeping you on curve. Has a lasting effect while I play is just basically I've either ramped, or when I'm attacking, I'm getting value from those creatures I played. And then helps communicate a game plan for deck building. I just think it says play lots of interesting utility creatures that care about their combat step. There's like a couple of Aurelias that I think work really well, hence her being in the background, even though their background is demand answers and not Aurelia specifically, but we can recognize her. There's a lot of white creatures that, like, because it'll persist until the end step and stuff like that. So having something like Ocelot Pride be sitting as a mountain is still going to trigger in the end step if you gain life and you make cats, and stuff like that is going to be really interesting, where if you have some of these targets that have interesting passive effects, they can sit and be protected because they will not succumb to creature removal and can potentially be doing interesting stuff. There's a lot of mana creatures that just turning them into the mountain land has value. So if my my Birds of Paradise becomes a land, it still has the Birds of Paradise tap ability, and also it is a colorless mountain land, so it inherently can tap for red, which I think is funny. So it has some cool implications there as well. I think this is a very interesting card, and Wizards of the Coast will owe me royalties if they print it. This is Narset of 2 lifetimes. This is the Jeskai Commander. This is the final emblem card that I designed, And again, I don't think it is too broken, but I think it is mechanically interesting. The text box reads, when Narset enters, create an emblem with Flurry. When you cast your second spell each turn, creatures you control gain prowess. Whenever you cast your second spell each turn, create a copy of target creature you control with mana value 3 or less. Because Narset costs 4, you can never potentially copy Narset. But I think this is a really interesting design, first of all, because even if you have infinite emblems, you still have to cast 3 spells to get the first prowess trigger. And prowess is an interesting keyword because you can have multiple copies of prowess, and each copy of that keyword is going to trigger itself and give that creature a +1/+1 buff. So when you cast your second spell, it gives everything prowess. When you cast your third spell, it triggers that prowess. When you have multiple emblems, each of them will give a different instance of prowess. So the multiple times you cast Narset, the stronger those prowess abilities are going to be, which is kind of the idea. I really like how that works, but it does say you need to have a lot of gas to potentially be making prowess happen constantly, and prowess is specifically non-creature, which I think is interesting. Whereas if you look at the second line of text, whenever you cast your second spell each turn, create a copy of target creature you control with mana value 3 or less, you're looking at a lot of value creatures that are probably drawing cards, probably, putting cards in your hand, maybe exiling cards, giving you the ability to cast them, and then also making copies of them has extra value. So there's like some draw discard cards. You see a lot of stuff in Vivi's Cauldron deck at the moment, like Steamcore Scholar, where making copies of it's going to draw you cards and give you advantage that way. And then you're trying to give all these creatures prowess. So again, fear of missing out, same kind of vibe. And then you are able to make multiple copies of them the more spells you cast. So there's going to be a lot of spells that create tokens of creatures as well, potentially, or copies of creatures that you have already. Talking like Molten Duplicate or stuff like that go really, really well in this deck. I think that it is pretty similar to a lot of other existing cards in the Jeskai Commander archetype. Like there is a Narset that just says all your creatures have prowess, and then based on my power when I do stuff, things matter. And so this isn't that far away from that, but it has a lasting impact because the emblem will be there forever. So if Narset dies, your other creatures will still have that ability to gain prowess and keep that pressure on. Aggro is a really, really difficult archetype to be playing in Commander, and I think having more powerful stuff like this, or even the Felithar, which is like, okay, even if my commander is dead, I still have access to that emblem that's going to make my guys more powerful, is probably more of the way to go, because it gets harder and harder to close out the game the further up you go if you're not also building out your board state. If you get reset one time, you're kind of out of the game. This is one of those ways to kind of keep that value train curve working. And I think Narset is pretty cool. Let's move on to our next one. This is Quetzar Reaching Beyond. This is our Esper commander. Now, Esper is an interesting one because I trashed the entire color trio, saying that there wasn't really anything good in there. Most things cost too much. Tivit costs 6, and all bro does is give you a treasure or a clue. Are you kidding? There's just so many things that are so close. Ishtola, which I think was possibly the best choice there, still says you need to overcome a lot of hurdles to activate her abilities on the turn that you play her. So it can be a little bit jank. Now, Quetzar was inspired by Toulouse, who I did actually pick for that video to show off, which had the Connive ability, and instead I picked something that felt a little bit more powerful, a little bit more utility, and a little bit more towards Zur the Enchanter, which I thought was an interesting way to look at this archetype. So text box reads, when Quetzar enters or attacks, it connives. And connive is draw a card, discard a card. If you discard a non-land card, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. The first time you discard an enchantment on your turn, if its mana value is less than Quetzar's power, put it onto the battlefield instead. So if Quetzar's power is 10, you can play Bahamut for free onto the battlefield if you discarded it this turn. If you connived and you discard a Propaganda or Ghostly Prism, which costs 3, the +1 counter will go onto Quetzar, and then Quetzar will go, well, hey, would you like to put this onto the battlefield instead? And then, yes, you can get a free Ghostly Prism. So the idea is that you're trying to play a lot of enchantments for value, make Quetzal be able to play some of them for free to help get you started. Maybe start building the pillow fort. Maybe start setting up some, adaptation. Play that Re-Stick Study for free because that is also an enchantment that costs 3, and then start kind of running away from the game like that. You only get 1 on your turn, and the first one costs 3 unless if you have a way of making Quetzal's power be bigger on the turn that you play it, which isn't super likely on turn 3 or turn 4. And on turn 3 or turn 4, you could just be playing Re-Stick Study. So it's like, okay, I have a 3-4 and also a Re-Stick Study. Isn't that crazy powerful? But being able to repeat it, being able to reach time, you're also just kind of hand sculpting. So Quetzal enters, and it triggers. If they respond to the connive trigger, then you won't get the enchantment for free, but you still get to draw a thing. This is on the lower power end compared to some of the emblems, but I think this is much more likely to be a real printed card compared to those. So if that has any value for you, I think that's interesting, because I think this is like really close to Zur the Enchanter, except it has upwards mobility, because Zur, even though it's really good, is limited to CMC 3 or less when it comes to searching them out of your library. I may have name dropped the wrong Zur, but it's one of the Zurs. And this one says, okay, if my power increases, if you continue to connive and put counters on me, then I'm going to get to play bigger and bigger enchantments, which I think is also fine. But the difference is that it has to be in your hand. Like, you have to find it. You have to have Enlightened Tutored for it or whatever. So it's like at the end of turn 3, I Enlighten Tutor, I untap, I draw the thing that I want to play with Quetzal, I play Quetzal. I then get to play that 3-drop, Re-Stick Study that I Enlighten Tutor for, and I Re-Stick Study. I don't think that's busted. I think that's pretty good, actually. And like, this is the kind of interaction that I want more out of an Esper deck, where it's like, okay, this is the game plan. I'm pushing forward towards it. And there's an Ortsov commander kind of like this, where she's like, I care about auras attached to my opponent's creatures. That I'm like, I really just want it to have just that little bit more in this direction, a little bit more Esper. I like the Quetzal that exists, where whenever you draw cards, things happen. But it's a lot harder for it to have an impact immediately when you play it, because it doesn't do anything other than when it sees you draw cards. And unless if you're drawing cards instantly, it's a bit wet. So let's move on to our second last one. This is Sidisi, Holder of the Leash. This is the Sultai commander, and it reads, when Sidisi enters or attacks, each player reveals the top card of their library. Put all lands revealed this way onto the battlefield tapped under your control, and the rest into its owner's graveyard. Lands you control but don't own have tap. The owner of this permanent mills 1, you scry 1, and loses all other abilities. So let's break it down. This one I think is super interesting. So when CDC enters, you will see a land from every player, potentially, because if it's not any lands, you're not going to get anything, and then any lands revealed, you get to play. So this is similar to the Smeagol card, which I really like, which is black-green, and then when you are tempted by the ring, you steal a land out of your opponent's deck, and you can potentially mill every single player this way. In theory, if you blinked CDC every single time, you could, if their deck was 99 mountains, you could potentially mill a player. I don't really think that's going to happen. But you get these extra lands. Now, the lands that you control but don't own don't have mana abilities. So if you play something like Chromatic Lantern, you can turn them all on and they can start to generate value. Or you play something like Urbog, you play something like Yavimaya Cradle of Growth, which are both in these colors. Those lands do turn on and start generating mana. So it can potentially snowball really, really fast if you do hit some of this mana fixing. But also, they specifically have this ability of tap the owner of this permanent mills 1. So if you think the top card is not going to be a land, if you are just trying to mill them out, you can be tapping those lands to get those incremental value. Obviously, this might be way too powerful if you hit all of the time. But odds are you would probably hit one land off each of the 4 players. Not like 4 in one activation, like 1 land per activation, which is not crazy odds-wise, because you say 36 lands to a deck. It's still 1 in 3. And then as the game goes on, people are deck thinning. They've rampant growth a bunch of times. They've cracked some fetch lands. Your odds of hitting become less. So it can be a little bit luck if you hit big on the first go and also have my Urbog. So all cool. I have 7 mana when I untap. is kind of like a niche scenario. It could just be that you, if that was a scenario we're really worried about, you can just go, okay, we pick one, and then deal with it if there was 4 revealed, because you only get one and you pick one guy, and it's just like way less interesting and good. This one I think is really cute because you're building up these tools in play that give you the ability to slowly mill your opponent's decks. So you could go, okay, this is communicating to me a game plan of, I want to be playing stuff like Mind Grind, I want to be playing stuff like Mind Funeral, and I'm milling out my opponent's decks. And then this is enabling that, or I'm trying to use this as a ramp deck, so I can play big spells like Villainous Wealth, where I'm just like ripping cards over the top of my opponent's deck to cast them. Or I just get to scry like a million times if I'm trying to build out another different combo, or I'm just trying to make sure that I crop rotation into the Urborg so that I just am getting mana advantage and I don't care about that extra ability. I think it has a lot of different ways to play it, which is kind of interesting. And this is definitely a card that I would love to play. I really do like Smeagol, and I really don't think Golgari has just enough for it to be a deck that I want to play yet. And Smeagol basically says, okay, you just play the, what is it, Dunedain Rangers or whatever, that just makes you landfall, the ring tempts you, and you go, okay, mill everyone. And you're like, that's not what I wanted. I wanted to play like a funky ramp deck. And I think this meets that dream that I have in me, the thing that I wish Smeagol was. Now, here we come to the very last card on the list. Now, this is a special one, and you're going to see why in a second. But here's the challenge. If you thought any of these other cards I revealed and talked about so far are too powerful, are not interesting or not fun, or don't meet the listed requirements that I put out earlier, or you just think that I suck in general and you want to write a hate comment, if you do not include what you think the Mardu Commander, Marchesa, should do that meets the requirements and is mechanically interesting, you have failed. Your critiques mean nothing to me, because I do this for a living and I get paid to do it, and you are a random YouTube commenter, and I want to see what cool Mardu Commander designs that you can come up with. A lot of the criticism on the why aren't there any good Esper Commanders video was that because Celes, the Mardu Commander, is an incredibly powerful and pushed design in the Final Fantasy set, people were like, well, how dare you compare this to everything else because it's so overpowered and pushed. So I'm like, well, actually, it just does a good job of the one thing that it's trying to do. I don't necessarily need it to be that powerful. It just happens to meet all the requirements the best. There is a lot of other commanders that are way less powerful, but are just as interesting and do meet the requirements really, really well. And so I want to see what you think the replacement could be. What do you think this Marchesa could accomplish for 4 mana, Mardu colors? It's a 3/3. What keywords, what effects do you put on this card? Put them in the comments because I'm interested to know. And look, while you're typing keys and pressing buttons and stuff, you might as well click the like button. You might as well click the subscribe button. And if you haven't gone and watched the previous design videos, you might as well go and check them out as well, because there is other goofy and interesting commanders in there and other stuff to give you some ideas about what it comes to making a good commander. So I've offered a lot, and now I'm curious to see what you've got for me.